Have you ever stared into a page and felt it staring back? Not metaphorically, but truly felt the weight of something watching you from within the ink? That's what happened to Wilfred Voynich in 1912, when he opened a wooden chest buried in the back room of a Jesuit college near Rome. Inside, among forgotten scrolls and brittle bindings, was a single codex that seemed wrong. The pages, thick and yellowed with time, exhaled the stale breath of centuries. Yet the drawings were vivid, too vivid. And the writing? It slithered across the parchment in strange looping symbols that no scholar, no monk, no cryptographer had ever recorded. It was a language that whispered, but never spoke. The manuscript, over 240 pages of densely packed strangeness, defied every attempt at comprehension. Each leaf contained plants that didn't exist, symbols that mimicked logic but betrayed no meaning, and images that pulsed with an almost biological rhythm. Voynich, a Polish book dealer and antiquarian, knew instantly that he hadn't discovered just a manuscript. He'd disturbed something. It felt alive. The ink shimmered as if still wet. As he turned the pages, there was a sensation of time folding inward, of history not revealing itself but hiding further. It was as if the book was protecting itself, or worse, preparing to be opened. The manuscript quickly drew the eyes of Europe's brightest minds. Voynich sent copies to cryptographers and linguists, each of whom returned empty-handed and uneasy. The pages were filled with unknown glyphs, delicate curves, spirals, hooks, and clusters that repeated with the rhythm of natural language, but resisted translation. There were no corrections, no signatures, no title. It bore no resemblance to Latin, Greek, Arabic, or any known code. And yet, it wasn't gibberish. Mathematicians analyzed it and found patterns, symmetry, entropy. It followed rules, which meant someone created it with intent. But who could have written such a thing in the 15th century? And why? The vellum, the calfskin pages, were carbon dated to the early 1400s, yet the ink's composition remained elusive, its pigments more advanced than the period allowed. Even more disturbing, several of the manuscript's diagrams appeared cosmological, showing moons, stars, and planetary cycles, but distorted, as if seen through another dimension. Voynich began to lose sleep. He confessed in his journal that he dreamed of the book opening itself, turning pages in the dark by unseen hands. And always, there was a presence, watching, waiting. As the years passed and Voynich died without unlocking its secrets, the manuscript was handed from scholar to scholar, each one drawn to its enigma like a moth to flame. Some believed it was the work of a forgotten genius, others, a magical grimoire written in a ciphered tongue. But one thing was certain: the Voynich manuscript was not merely unreadable, it was unread for a reason, as if the very act of understanding it would unravel something best left hidden. And so, the book waits. In Yale's Binecke Rare Book Library, sealed behind glass, still intact, still breathing. If the ink on the Voynich manuscript whispers madness, the vellum beneath it hums with contradiction. In 2009, a team of scientists subjected the parchment to radiocarbon dating. The results came back precise and unsettling. The pages were made between 1404 and 1438. That meant the manuscript had survived more than 6 centuries almost untouched. But there was more. While the pages were unquestionably medieval, the ink had no match. Its composition, iron gall with obscure traces of verdigris and an unknown binding agent, didn't fit any known recipe from the era. It was like discovering a fossil of a creature that should never have evolved. Even more curious was the manufacturing of the vellum itself. Normally, such parchment would show clear signs of regional origin, specific follicle patterns, the stretch of the skin, the way it was scraped. But this vellum seemed neutral, sterile, as if someone had deliberately erased its DNA. There were no watermarks, no signs of reuse. Every sheet, while weathered, appeared prepared with the same meticulous hand, as if grown, not made. And when held to the light, strange patterns danced across the surface. Not quite text, not quite images. Ghosts of ideas, half-formed, just out of reach. The binding raised even more eyebrows. Though the current cover is modern, the original spine, long decayed, appears to have been stitched using a rare Coptic technique. This was not common in 15th century Europe, and the quires, or gatherings of pages, were assembled in a non-linear order. Folio numbers, added later in a different hand, suggest pages were lost or deliberately removed. What was taken out, and why? Some scholars believe the missing folios held the key to the cipher. Others suspect they contained information that was too dangerous, too revealing. Perhaps they were never meant to be read by human eyes. Multispectral scans in recent years have uncovered something even more chilling. Beneath the visible ink lie underdrawings, partial sketches, and ghost text that suggest the manuscript was not written in a single flow. It was layered, corrected, rewritten. In some cases, earlier versions of illustrations depict even more disturbing figures. Botanical diagrams with pulsing, vein-like tendrils, star charts with eyes embedded in the constellations, even humanoid shapes, half erased. It was as if the book was evolving, responding to the mind of its scribe, or resisting it. The manuscript wasn't just a static object, it was dynamic, alive in its own way. But the most disturbing theory is also the simplest. What if the vellum is older than the writing? That someone, centuries later, found blank sheets of untouched parchment and chose to inscribe them with forbidden knowledge. That the Voynich Manuscript is not an artifact of its time, but a message buried in the past for future eyes. This would explain the anomalies, the deliberate construction, the feeling that the book is waiting, not to be discovered, but to be activated. And as each new scan, each AI analysis, each digital fingerprint brings us closer to understanding it, one question looms like a shadow. What happens when we finally do? The first thing you notice about the Voynich Manuscript's writing is that it flows. It isn't the clumsy scrawl of an amateur, nor the broken, jagged cipher of a hurried hand. It's elegant, almost beautiful. The symbols dance across the page in smooth, fluid motion, as though the scribe had written them 1,000 times before. There are no corrections, no second thoughts. It's as if the author wasn't inventing a language, but recalling one. And yet, for over a century, no one has been able to read a single word. Cryptographers have analyzed the script exhaustively, known as Voynichese. It consists of roughly 25 distinct characters, often grouped into words that follow patterns hauntingly similar to natural language. Frequencies, repetitions, and letter placement obey rules seen in living tongues, but they don't match any known language, living or dead. Zipf's law applies. Word frequency is inverse to its rank in occurrence, just like in English or Latin. Yet no root words can be identified, no phonetic structures. It feels like a language until you try to speak it. And then there are the rules, the hidden logic. Certain characters only appear at the beginnings of words, others only at the end. Some never appear next to each other. Statistical models have shown it's far too ordered to be random, too fluid to be a hoax. It has entropy, structure, even grammar. But that grammar leads nowhere, as though it was built to simulate meaning without delivering it. AI models trained on hundreds of languages have tried to decode it. Some can generate new Voynichese that mirrors the original perfectly, but none can translate it. None can tell us what it says. The more you look, the more it eludes you. Some believe it's a cipher, perhaps a verbose one, where each symbol represents a phrase, not a letter. But if so, it's far more complex than anything known from its era. Others argue it's a constructed language like Tolkien's Elvish or Esperanto, but one with no root, no evolution, no culture behind it. Just syntax in a void. Still others claim it's a form of glossolalia, language channeled during trance or possession. This idea chills scholars. What if the scribe wasn't inventing words but receiving them? And from whom? But perhaps the most unnerving realization is this. The text wants to be read. It presents itself with seductive order. It flirts with recognition. You start to see patterns, feel intuitions, think you're just one insight away from unlocking it. And that's the trap. Many who study it report dreams of the symbols shifting, aligning, revealing things they can't recall upon waking. The Voynich Manuscript doesn't resist understanding. It feeds on the attempt. It lures you in. And before long, you're not reading the book. The book is reading you. At first glance, the Voynich Manuscript appears to be a botanical treatise. Leaf after leaf presents what seem to be plants, roots, stems, leaves, blossoms. But the longer you look, the more it becomes clear. These are not plants that have ever grown on this earth. The stems curve in impossible spirals, the leaves twist like serpents, and the flowers bloom in symmetrical patterns that feel more architectural than biological. Every page vibrates with unnatural precision. These aren't drawings, they're instructions, blueprints for something alive but not natural. Botanists have tried for decades to match these illustrations with known species. A few fragments, leaves here, petals there, bear resemblance to herbs found in medieval texts. But they're fused with other elements, hybridized beyond recognition. One flower has the root system of a ginseng plant, the stem of a sunflower, and a blossom that resembles no flora known to man. It's as if someone had dissected nature and rebuilt it from memory, flawed memory. Or perhaps memory from another world. The colors, too, defy traditional ink. Faded now, but once vivid with emerald, crimson, and ochre, hues not found in any contemporary manuscript. Worse still are the anatomical qualities hidden in the designs. Some roots resemble arterial systems, branching out like veins. Several blossoms appear to have pupils. In one illustration, a long, tendril-like stem coils around what looks disturbingly like a human ribcage. Another plant has tiny fingers unfurling from its buds. Was this a scribe's fevered imagination? Or were these diagrams representations of something more sinister? Organisms not found in botany books but grimoires? There's a growing belief among some researchers that this section isn't about plants at all. It's a disguised catalog of biological experiments, a manual of transformation, and then there's the repetition. Across multiple pages, similar plant forms are rendered again and again with slight variations, as though the illustrator was trying to capture a shifting subject, something that wouldn't stay still. Several images appear to show time-lapse evolution, roots growing, petals spreading, the whole organism mutating with each new drawing. If that's true, it suggests observation, not imagination. Someone saw these things and drew them down. But where and when? The margins offer no comfort, just looping text in Voynich, encircling the plants like incantations, as though the script itself was keeping them contained. For those who've studied this section, the aftermath is often the same. Dreams of gardens that breathe, forests where the trees whisper, greenhouses where nothing human should tread. One researcher claimed the plants in the manuscript changed shape when viewed under candlelight. Another locked away his notes and refused to speak of them again, because somewhere within those pages, between the roots and blossoms, there's a pulse, a rhythm, as if the book remembers the place these things came from, and it's calling them back. There's a section in the Voynich Manuscript that unsettles even the most hardened researchers, known unofficially as the balneological pages. On first look, they seem to depict nothing more than women bathing. But linger, and you'll feel it, that sudden crawling awareness that something is deeply wrong. Page after page shows dozens of naked female figures, almost childlike in form, immersed in strange green pools, sometimes funneling liquid through bizarre vein-like tubes. Their expressions are blank, their postures passive, but the water around them seems alive, churning, glowing, and coiling as if it's feeding on them. What's disturbing isn't the nudity, it's the precision of the plumbing. Interconnected vats, siphons, conduits, and translucent vessels wrap through the pages like the organs of some unseen machine. The women are not merely soaking, they're being processed. Their bodies connect to devices that would be out of place even in a 20th century lab. One figure appears to be extracting something from a second figure's abdomen. In another, multiple women feed into a single pulsing vat via spiral tubes that enter through their spines. The imagery suggests rituals, purification, or perhaps extraction. But of what? The pools themselves are drawn in green and blue inks, colors used nowhere else in the manuscript with such consistency. And around these baths, always, is text. Voynich spirals around the tubs in swirling lines, as though the very act of bathing must be accompanied by incantation. Some scholars once believed this section illustrated medieval bathing practices. That theory has been abandoned. The architecture is not Roman. The mechanisms aren't feasible. Instead, theories have shifted into darker territory. Alchemical wombs, metaphysical surgeries, experiments in reproduction or soul transference. The women are not subjects, they are vessels. Even more disturbing is the repetition of certain symbols near the women's bodies. Stars, moons, planetary glyphs, astrological alignments, as though the baths were timed to celestial events. Some diagrams map the women's positions onto zodiac wheels, connecting them like nodes in a circuit. If this section is medical, it's not medicine of any earthly variety. If it's ritual, it's one we've long forgotten, or wisely abandoned. In one image, a woman floats alone in a blackened pool, her body arched unnaturally, mouth open, eyes missing. Above her, a symbol drawn in red ink, used nowhere else in the manuscript. And for those who've studied these pages too closely, the nightmares return. Visions of endless corridors filled with echoing water, of voices chanting in syllables that burn the tongue. One researcher claimed the pools had depth, as if you could fall into them from the page. Another swore he saw one of the women blink. Because whatever these images are, they are not innocent. They are not meant to be seen without consequence. They depict a ritual, a process, one still waiting to be completed. And each time you look, it feels as if you're being invited to take the next step. If the women in the waters haunted you, what comes next might break you. Deeper in the manuscript lies the astronomical section, a domain where stars, suns, and moons spin across the pages like wheels set in motion by a forgotten intelligence. At first glance, you might think they resemble medieval zodiac charts, circular diagrams with glyphs representing Aries, Taurus, Gemini. But stare longer, and you'll notice something is fundamentally off. The constellations are distorted, the positions wrong, the rotations inverted. It's a sky that's not ours, a night that has never existed on this earth. The stars are drawn in meticulous clusters, but many have lines connecting them in ways that suggest circuitry rather than constellations. There are moons with spiral arms, suns with human eyes, and charts overlaid with text. Again in Voynich, that spiral inward like whirlpools. One diagram features a central orb surrounded by concentric rings filled with unknown symbols, each ring intersected by biological tendrils. It's part telescope, part altar, part machine. Some diagrams contain radial lines that track planetary movements, but the intervals are non-Euclidean, the timing off. It's as if someone mapped a system governed by laws just adjacent to our own. More unsettling are the figures embedded within these astral wheels. Tiny female bodies, again nude, appear nestled inside stars, suspended in vessels, or orbiting central nodes. They seem to drift not through space but through structure, as if the stars themselves are housing, preserving, or conducting them. One chart has 30 women arranged around a spiral with tubes connecting their heads to a dark center. A black sun, perhaps. It calls to mind neither astronomy nor mythology, but something clinical, something invasive. The zodiac here isn't guiding fate, it's engineering it. Attempts to decode these diagrams using known celestial models have all failed. The angles don't align with Earth-based observations. Some believe it maps a geocentric model of another world, while others think it's a metaphor for a process, perhaps metaphysical, perhaps reproductive, perhaps apocalyptic. A recent theory suggests it's not mapping stars at all, but states of consciousness. That these charts represent inner cosmology, the stages of transformation of the self, or of the soul. If true, the manuscript may not be showing us the heavens, but the journey beyond them. and those who immerse themselves in this section report strange symptoms: dizziness, a sense of falling upward, vertigo in dreams. One astrophysicist quit their research entirely after claiming the diagrams showed a working model of nonlinear time. Another researcher, fluent in medieval astronomy, believed the manuscript depicts a rotating dome over a flat realm, but said no more before going silent. Because somewhere within these charts, amid the stars that don't exist and moons that blink, is the undeniable sense that someone else is looking back, and they are far, far older than us. If the visible pages of the Voynich Manuscript disturb, what lies beneath them terrifies. In the last decade, scholars armed with multispectral imaging and high-resolution scanners began peeling back the surface of the manuscript, not to damage it, but to look into its underlayers. What they found sent a chill through the academic world. Beneath the ornate text and meticulous illustrations were hidden sketches, erasures, phantom lines, as if the manuscript had a memory, as if something older had been buried beneath what we see. On several pages, faint diagrams emerged, alternate versions of the strange plants, earlier layouts of the astronomical wheels, faded ink strokes that resembled eyes and limbs, now absent from the surface. In one instance, a page believed to depict a bathing scene was revealed to have once included a large humanoid figure with an elongated skull, scratched out and painted over. Another image, of a central wheel surrounded by floating symbols, was discovered to have once held a face at its core, later blotted with pigment so thoroughly that only imaging in the infrared spectrum could recover its outline. The face had no mouth, just a black, gaping hollow. Even more unsettling were the layers of text. Underneath the spiraling Voynich script, several pages contain earlier inscriptions, also in Voynich, but written with different spacing, different flourishes, even different hands. This suggests either multiple authors or a single author undergoing transformation. The underlying versions seem more frantic, less elegant, almost desperate. Some letters are scratched into the parchment with pressure so deep it left indentations visible centuries later. It's as if the first draft was an invocation, raw, unstable, and the surface version is the controlled form, the containment. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery of corrections. Entire illustrations revised, restructured, hidden. Plants redrawn with new root systems. Figures relocated. In some places, elements were scraped off the vellum entirely and replaced, a laborious and intentional act. Scholars speculated, what was wrong with the original versions? Were they too revealing, too dangerous? Or did they fail to achieve their intended effect? The manuscript doesn't just communicate, it evolves, it adjusts, it hides its most dangerous truths under layers of misdirection. This layered complexity has led some to propose a terrifying theory. The Voynich Manuscript is not a single document, but the final version of something rewritten many times, across years, decades, or even centuries. Each iteration buried beneath the next, as if knowledge was being refined, restricted, encrypted again and again. It's not just a puzzle, it's a defense system. A vault of forbidden information sealed under recursive secrecy. And each scan, each algorithm, each digital breakthrough brings us closer to breaching that seal, closer to something that was never meant to be remembered. If the Voynich Manuscript is a cipher, it's one so profound it has evaded the best minds of the last 100 years. From the wartime cryptographers of Bletchley Park to modern-day codebreakers armed with quantum algorithms, no one has cracked it. Not because they haven't tried, but because the manuscript resists classification. It mirrors language but offers no translation. It follows patterns but yields no meaning. It feels deliberate but it refuses to be known. Like a lock with no keyhole, or worse, one that changes shape each time you look. One of the earliest theories proposed that the manuscript used a substitution cipher, each glyph standing for a Latin letter, rearranged into secrecy. That approach quickly fell apart. The frequency distributions didn't match. The repeated patterns weren't consistent with known encryption systems. Others suggested a polyalphabetic cipher, perhaps a complex medieval version of the Vigenère cipher. Again, no luck. The deeper researchers dug, the more they found an architecture that seemed almost organic, as if the text wasn't encrypted information, but information alive, shifting beneath its surface. In the 2000s, a team at the University of Arizona ran statistical analyses on the manuscript's entropy and character sequences. The results were unnerving. The text displayed the complexity of natural language, but not the logic. It was structured, but incoherent. The distribution of word lengths and repetition of certain terms mimicked human speech, but no linguistic family matched. It was as if the author knew how language should look, without actually speaking one. Or perhaps more disturbingly, they were writing in a language that no longer or never existed in our reality. This led to even darker speculation, that the manuscript cipher is not linguistic at all, but steganographic, where meaning is hidden not in the text but in the illustrations, the layout, the placement of lines and curves. One radical theory claims the true message lies in the spacing between glyphs, or the number of petals in each plant, or the sequence of stars in the astronomical diagrams. A kind of visual symphony, unreadable unless viewed with a forgotten tool or through the lens of a forgotten paradigm. One researcher even proposed the manuscript is meant to be sung, with each symbol representing a sound in an alien tonal system. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. In 2017, a machine learning algorithm was fed thousands of linguistic corpora and then shown the Voynich script. It responded not with a translation, but a behavior. The AI began to generate its own Voynich-like language, completely original, but indistinguishable from the manuscript. And it didn't just mimic the patterns. It started developing new words, new structures, ones not found in the original, but perfectly consistent with its style. The algorithm had not translated the manuscript. It had joined it. As though the manuscript wasn't asking to be read. It was asking to replicate. By now, it's clear the Voynich manuscript wasn't written for us. But what if it wasn't written by us either? As linguists and cryptanalysts failed to make sense of its script, a new theory began to take shape. Not one of logic, but of altered consciousness. Some believe the manuscript is not a cipher at all, but a work of glossolalia, language produced in a trance state, without rational control. In other words, it may have been dictated by something beyond the author's conscious mind, or by something not of this world at all. This idea is not without precedent. Medieval mystics like Hildegard von Bingen experienced intense visions, often accompanied by unknown alphabets and divine languages. Her works, beautiful and cryptic, are often described as ecstatic transmissions. So what if the Voynich author was undergoing something similar, but darker? Instead of angelic symphonies, they were channeling something older, something stranger. Maybe the book isn't a message meant to be deciphered, but a document of communion, the record of a voice that needed to be written down, even if it could never be understood. Some signs support this. The rhythmic structure of the Voynich's text resembles automatic writing, repetitive, fluid, and compulsively neat. It shows no planning, no correction, no second guessing, just pure outpouring. Researchers have even compared the flow of the script to trance-induced writings found in spiritualist movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, where mediums claim to transcribe messages from the dead, from spirits, or from the other side. But the Voynich is older, if it is such a message. It's the oldest recorded instance of this kind of possession. More disturbingly, multiple analyses suggest changes in handwriting style throughout the manuscript. Subtle, but real. As if the writer's hand was shifting during the process. Some believe it indicates multiple scribes. Others propose something more terrifying, a single scribe being altered by what they were transcribing. The text evolving the person writing it, changing their mind, their language, their self. It's not just a manuscript, it's a conduit, a membrane between something inside and something outside. And when you study it long enough, you don't just read the symbols, you begin to hear them. There are anecdotal accounts, quiet, rarely published, of researchers who've gone too deep. One linguist, after months with the manuscript, began writing in an invented script, unprompted. Another described waking up with words in their mouth, words they couldn't understand but felt true. A third locked themselves in a soundproof room and recorded hours of whispered speech, all in what they claimed was the language of the book. Their colleagues listened. The audio contained patterns, recurring phrases, and something in the background, breathing. Because maybe the manuscript isn't meant to be translated. Maybe it's meant to continue through us. In 2019, a British scholar named Dr. Gerard Cheshire ignited a firestorm of controversy when he claimed to have cracked the Voynich Manuscript's code. According to him, the book was written in a forgotten dialect of Proto-Romance, compiled by a group of nuns during a crisis in southern Italy around the mid-15th century. He described it not as a mystical tome or coded grimoire, but a practical manual, a mixture of medical knowledge, herbal remedies, star charts, and therapeutic rituals. But it wasn't the content that disturbed scholars. It was the context. Because if Cheshire is right, the manuscript is the last surviving artifact of a secretive, all-female order, and they were hiding something. Imagine it, a hidden convent isolated in the shadow of a collapsing kingdom, where the church's grip had faltered and the Inquisition was rising. In such a place, knowledge was both salvation and heresy. These women, cut off from sanctioned academia, may have created their own script, a blend of spoken vernacular and sacred code. They wrote in secret, not to obscure meaning, but to preserve it. From men, from outsiders, from those who would burn them for knowing too much. In this light, the manuscript becomes not madness but resistance, a vault of knowledge protected by myth, by mystery, and by misdirection. This theory reframes the entire manuscript. The bathing scenes, not metaphysical horror, but gynecological medicine, encoded to avoid accusations of witchcraft. The strange plants, local flora used in healing, fused with visual mnemonics to aid memory. The astronomical wheels, calendars of fertility and menstruation, perhaps tied to lunar cycles. The Voynich script, a hybrid language that combined Latin roots with phonetic spelling, cloaked under a veil of invented characters. It's almost comforting, until you remember the layers beneath the ink, the erased figures, the red symbols, the eyes and the stars. Even if this theory is true, something else is hiding in there. And then there's the question no one wants to ask. If this was the work of a secretive convent, where are the others? Where are the other books? Why was only this manuscript created in this code, with this art, with these impossible diagrams? Could it be that this group wasn't simply hiding from persecution, but from something else entirely? Perhaps they weren't writing a manual, but a warning, or worse, a ritual. A process handed down, refined, protected by a chosen few who knew it could not fall into the wrong hands, who knew that the danger wasn't just being understood, it was being completed. One chilling theory, seldom spoken aloud, suggests the manuscript was not created by the nuns, but through them, that they were conduits, not authors, that something visited them, something celestial or infernal, and demanded transcription. And now, 600 years later, we're picking up the pieces of a transmission that was never meant to reach us. If that's true, the Voynich Manuscript isn't a document, it's a contagion, and every person who tries to read it is simply carrying the message further, spreading it like a sacred infection. The Voynich Manuscript does something no ordinary book does. It pulls. From the moment Wilfrid Voynich laid eyes on it in 1912, he became consumed. He called it the most mysterious manuscript in the world, but privately, in his journals, he admitted more. He dreamed of the symbols. He felt watched. He began to refer to the book in the singular, not as an object, but as a presence. And he wasn't the last. Over the decades, countless scholars, linguists, and codebreakers have fallen into the manuscript's orbit. Most entered with rational minds. Few emerged unchanged. One of the earliest victims was William Friedman, the legendary American cryptographer who broke Japan's purple code during World War II. He spent the last years of his life obsessed with the Voynich. He assembled a team, wrote pages of analysis, even developed a new theory of language just to try to understand it. But in the end, it defeated him. His final notes were filled not with breakthroughs, but frustration. Nonsense. His last theory? That the manuscript was written in a constructed language so complex it could never be deciphered. A language without a key. A language designed to isolate. There are others. Anne Nill, Voynich's assistant, inherited much of the manuscript's mystery after his death. She kept it locked away, refusing access to some scholars without explanation. René Zandbergen, one of the foremost experts on the manuscript today, maintains massive archives of data, hypotheses, and theories. But even he admits, the deeper he dives, the more the manuscript changes. New patterns emerge, familiar glyphs shift meaning. It's as though the book adapts to its reader, showing just enough to keep them hooked, then receding into shadow again. Psychologists have even coined a term for it, Voynich fixation, a state of cognitive loop where the reader becomes convinced that understanding is just one insight away. Days become weeks. Dreams begin to reflect the book's architecture. Circular patterns, undecipherable writing, human figures dissolving into vines. Some report hearing whispers when reading the manuscript late at night. Words that have no language, but an undeniable rhythm. A few have had breakdowns. One man, an amateur linguist, disappeared entirely. He left behind pages of Voynich, handwritten, untranslated, arranged in spirals across the walls of his study. The manuscript doesn't offer knowledge. It offers invitation. It beckons. It hints. It traps. It becomes a mirror, reflecting the obsessions of those who study it, magnifying their flaws, their fears, their compulsions. And in that reflection, it multiplies itself. Every scholar who tries to break its code creates new theories, new branches of analysis, new patterns, fuel for the fire. In this way, the Voynich manuscript may be the most perfect trap ever built. A book that ensures its own survival, not by being understood, but by being pursued. Forever. For all its mystery, there remains one theory that refuses to die, one that's simple, brutal, and oddly comforting. That the Voynich manuscript is a hoax, a deliberate fabrication, a 15th century fraud designed to impress, to confuse, or perhaps simply to amuse. At first, this theory seems absurd. Who could possibly invest the time and artistry required to create over 200 pages of consistent, patterned nonsense, hand-illustrated, hand-inked, and beautifully bound? But then you remember people will do strange things for attention, or money, or madness. This line of thinking gained traction with Gordon Rugg, a British cognitive scientist who, in the early 2000s, demonstrated a method by which the manuscript could have been produced using a device known as a cardan grill, a kind of medieval template that allowed the scribe to construct pseudo-language with realistic word frequencies. Rugg replicated pages of Voynich with eerie accuracy. His implication was chilling. It didn't have to mean anything. It only had to look like it did. And in that deception lies the manuscript's true genius. Supporters of the hoax theory point to certain anomalies: the complete lack of corrections, the impossibly regular structure of the text, the anatomical impossibility of many plants, and the often nonsensical integration of scientific elements. If it's a guide to medicine or astronomy, why does it feel like a fever dream? If it's a cipher, why has no progress been made in centuries? Maybe that's the point. It was never supposed to be solved. It was meant to confound. And in that confusion, it succeeds beautifully. But then the unease creeps in. Because if the Voynich manuscript is a hoax, then why does it behave like a virus? Why do researchers dream of it? Why do machines trained on real languages start inventing new Voynichese when exposed to it? Why do readers report sensations, heat, vertigo, pressure while studying the pages? A forgery can trick the eye, yes. But can it trick the mind? Can it whisper? Can it grow? That's the paradox. The more evidence that it's a hoax, the less satisfying that answer becomes. And the more terrifying, because perhaps the greatest horror isn't that the manuscript was meant to communicate something. It's that it wasn't. That it is pure structure without soul. A cosmic joke, not crafted by a genius or a sorcerer, but by someone who wanted to create a void. A mirror for obsession, a trap for intellect. Something to waste your life on. And in that emptiness, we see ourselves. The manuscript doesn't need a secret. It is the secret that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They exist to consume. Among the many legends whispered about the Voynich Manuscript, few are as unsettling or as widely reported as this, that the manuscript changes. Not metaphorically, not interpretively, but literally. Researchers, historians, even skeptics who've spent prolonged time examining the original pages describe subtle shifts, glyphs altering shape, margins stretching, diagrams breathing. One professor at Yale, who once gave tours of the Voynich rare book library where the manuscript resides, claimed to have seen a curve on folio 68R that wasn't there the day before. He later retracted the statement, but he never stepped into that wing again. It might be chalked up to fatigue, suggestion, or the tricks of peripheral vision. But the stories persist. Some speak of lines that seem to shimmer under low light, or symbols that pulse when viewed too long. One archivist reported that a plant on one page grew over the course of several hours, a single petal unfurling imperceptibly, only noticed when comparing photographs taken just hours apart. Others claim more dramatic phenomena, diagrams rearranged, female figures changing position, stars that blink, and always that overwhelming sensation. The book is aware. The phenomenon isn't limited to visual distortion. Some researchers describe the pages as heavier over time, as if the manuscript resists handling the deeper one goes. Others report auditory hallucinations, soft scratching, dripping water, the rhythmic sound of breathing in an otherwise silent room. One psychologist who evaluated a linguist suffering from Voynich-induced sleep deprivation noted classic signs of induced dissociation, including compulsive writing in spiral patterns and a complete inability to recognize familiar languages. His diagnosis was simple, his warning chilling: don't read it alone. More than a few scholars have refused to handle the physical book at all, preferring digital scans. But even there, the experiences persist. A programmer building an AI model to replicate the text claimed the generated pages began predicting symbols before they were input. It was like it knew where I was going, he said. Like it was guiding me. His final submission to the project was a 12-page document, entirely in original Voynich. No one knows how he created it. He no longer answers emails. And so, the manuscript becomes more than a puzzle. It becomes an event, a shifting presence. Perhaps it was always meant to be interactive, not in the modern digital sense, but in the psychic one. A book that completes itself through its reader, that reshapes to fit the mind that touches it. Or worse, that reshapes the mind to fit it. The pages don't shift randomly. They shift with purpose, and if you stare long enough, they'll show you exactly what you want to see, until you forget what it was you were looking for in the first place. Beneath the ink, beneath the vellum, beneath even the theories and the desperate scholarship, there is a whisper, not a sound exactly, but a sensation that threads through every encounter with the Voynich manuscript, a pulse that runs below language, a message that bypasses understanding and goes straight to the part of the brain that fears fire, teeth, and the dark. Some say it's just suggestion, the echo of obsession. Others aren't so sure. Because if the manuscript isn't meant to be read, or solved, or even understood, what is it? One theory has begun to gain quiet traction among those brave, or foolish enough to study the book without trying to possess it. The idea that the manuscript isn't a puzzle, but a trigger. That the words, the glyphs, the symbols, the women, the stars, the plants, they aren't parts of a code. They're components of a mechanism, one not mechanical but psychic, linguistic, ritualistic. A ritual in paper and ink, a series of alignments meant not to convey meaning, but to enact it. That to read the manuscript is not to learn from it, but to perform it. The structure supports this. Repetition, cycles, diagrams arranged in sequences, instructions embedded in silence. Like a chant that only reveals its power through rhythm, the manuscript might not be information, but incantation. One linguist suggested it mimics the neural pathways of thought itself, loops of meaning circling around central unspoken truths. Another, less diplomatically, said, "This book is trying to wake something up." If that's true, then every analysis, every scan, every uttered glyph is part of that awakening. And we are the ones doing it, word by word, page by page. There are accounts, strange, unverifiable, but eerily consistent, of people experiencing synchronicity after studying the manuscript. Dreams that predict small events, names whispered by strangers, a sudden unshakable awareness of being watched. One man described the feeling as walking into a room you've never seen before, but knowing exactly where everything is, and knowing it's not your room. Another, a monk-turned-linguist, called it the language of the silence between thoughts. And still others say nothing at all. They just stare at the pages, lips moving, eyes glassy, as if hearing instructions in a voice too low to record. And then comes the most terrifying possibility of all. What if the manuscript is not incomplete? What if it's waiting for a final reader, the one whose mind fits the lock, the one who doesn't break trying to understand it but bends, becomes, opens? What if the Voynich Manuscript is a seed, and all these centuries have just been the slow, inevitable gathering of the right soil, and when the last symbol is understood, not by accident, but by invitation, something buried in those pages, in us, in the dark beyond understanding, then will finally speak. It rests behind glass now, climate-controlled, surrounded by ancient tomes in Yale's Beinecke Rare Book Library. To the casual visitor, it's just another curiosity, another relic among thousands. But those who know, who truly know, never look at it for long. The Voynich Manuscript doesn't need to call attention to itself anymore. It's already won. Hundreds of years, thousands of minds, millions of words poured into its black mouth, and it has given nothing in return. And still, we stare. Still, we try. Because some part of us believes that if we solve it, we'll know. But know what? There's a theory, unpublished, whispered among those who've stared too long, that the manuscript was never intended to be understood in pieces, that it isn't even complete. The missing folios, estimated to number at least 28, weren't lost. They were withheld, or hidden, or perhaps destroyed by someone who finally understood what the book was doing. Because if the manuscript is a ritual, then it's unfinished, incomplete, inert, for now. But that only raises a more disturbing thought. What happens when it's whole again? We talk of it as a mystery, as a problem to be solved. But what if that's a defense mechanism, our minds trying to rationalize something fundamentally alien, something that doesn't fit into our definitions of knowledge or faith or sanity? The manuscript doesn't behave like an object. It behaves like an entity. It resists, it adapts, it seduces. And for centuries it has waited for the right mind, the right voice, the right combination of time, space, intent, and madness. When that moment arrives, perhaps the symbols will unlock, the diagrams will align, and something older than words will speak through the pages. And you, listener, what if you've already begun the process? What if just hearing about the Voynich Manuscript, imagining it, picturing its pages and glyphs and green waters, has started something? A whisper in your own mind, a shape in the corner of your eye that wasn't there yesterday, a word that won't leave your dreams. Because maybe this isn't a story about a book, maybe it's the book's story about you. So now the manuscript sleeps again, ink resting in silence, pages still and quiet. But something waits beneath it, beneath language, beneath time. Something vast, patient, ancient. It does not care if we solve it, it only cares that we keep trying. Because in trying we open the door. When that door opens all the way, when the last glyph turns, will we still be the ones reading the book, or will the book be reading us?